Welcome everyone to this month's Rare Birds Deep Dive, The Mastery of Modern Leadership. My name's Tegan and I'm the Partnership and Community Manager at Inspiring Rare Birds. In the spirit of reconciliation, Rare Birds would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Today, I'm joined by Cherry Ward, who will be speaking about the evolving expectations placed on leaders and shedding light on the pivotal role self-leadership plays in shaping your leadership style. We also have a poll available now, which Cherry will talk to when she begins. But if you'd like to respond, we'd really like to get your insights on that one. For those who are new to the Inspiring Rare Birds community, our mission is to create, support and promote diverse and inclusive workplaces where opportunities in entrepreneurship and leadership exist equally for everyone. We are best known for our mentoring programs. We also offer a range of educational masterclasses. We host online and in-person events to provide people with opportunities to build their network and grow with the Rare Birds community. If you'd like to learn more, please indicate your interest in the survey, which will be at the end of today's session, or you can reach out to me or anyone on the Rare Birds team. If you look to the side of your screen, you'll see that there's a chat function. I encourage you to introduce yourself, say hello, make comments, and connect with other people on the call. You'll also see a Q&A tab. We will be having a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to pop your questions in there. As mentioned, there will be a survey. We would love for you to fill this out. We really appreciate any insights and also what you'd like to hear from these sessions in the future. I'd now like to introduce Cherry, who is the founder of Bluebird Leadership and Thriving Women. Cherry brings a holistic approach to leadership, culture, and sustainability transformation. As a seasoned leader, consultant, facilitator, and executive coach, she empowers leaders to drive systemic change. Cherry integrates sustainable practices, inner development, and systems approaches to inspire organizations to make a positive, lasting impact on their ecosystems. Welcome, Cherry.
Thanks, Tegan. Hi, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you, Tegan. So I'm connected to you here from Meanjin, which is in Brisbane. And I wanted to just start off and talk a little bit about my journey and I guess, how I landed in this role. So I've been a Rare Bird mentor for about 3 years when I was working in the corporate field. And my journey began nearly 5 years ago. When I had a dream, I wanted to create transformative experiences for leaders, where they could immerse in nature, I guess reconnect with themselves, embrace challenges and become advocates for a more sustainable future, for their organizations, communities and the planet. I can recall the exact moment. It was a December afternoon in Canada in the breathtaking Canadian Rockies at my favourite ski field, and my ski coach and I had just taken the last chair up to the summit, so the sun was starting to set, and it was just this beautiful, beautiful light. And I shared my vision with her because that year had been a roller coaster of a ride. Starting off with a skiing accident that needed months of rehab. That would have stopped most people from going back to the sport. My family had just moved to Canada on a work assignment, only to discover after 3 months of being there that we had to go home just because the project joint venture was dissolving. So amidst all of the uncertainty, anxiety and stress, skiing became a lifeline and also a solace of, strengths and exploration of inner work for me. And as I was going through this experience personally and professionally, I began observing that how we work and how organizations were operating needed to shift. I was operating within an ecosystem, that was really quick to make decisions. It was a win or lose mindset, very linear and mechanistic approach in their thinking without considering the wider complex living system that we were a part of. And that led me to think about, what's expected of leaders has really changed. It's no longer I guess, the Henry Ford Industrial Revolution style of management, where people are just a part of the process on the assembly line. The world is more complex now. Work and life is no longer separate. It's integrated. And what I'm seeing, what I was starting to see within the organisation I'm working at, and also speaking to my colleagues in the wider field, is that many leaders are stepping up into leadership roles, whether it's the first time or whether it's stepping up to a larger role without enablement or support, or the right kind of support. And a lot of the leadership programs really focus on, sorry, let me just move my slides. A lot of the leadership programs really focused on, the outer skills, what I call, like giving feedback, managing projects, delegating, communication skills, which are really important. But we cannot lead others if we don't understand ourselves first. I love this quote from philosopher Lao Tzu, which is, mastering others is a strength. Mastering oneself is true power. And if you're familiar with Otto Scharmer's work and Theory U, he often quotes that the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So that means that, the way we lead others depends on our interior condition and our mindset. One of my colleagues and fellow coach, Rebecca Niebler, often says the way you speak to yourself sets the tone for every other relationship in your life, and that includes leading others. So if we want to understand how we relate to others and lead other people, we first have to understand ourselves first and lead ourselves first. So as you can see here on this slide, there's a typical sort of leadership development model. This is one that I use in my practice as well. So you can see these concentric circles, and they're sort of like the keys to unlocking, leadership. So we first have to start with self-leadership, which is, we need to see the change within ourselves first, and then move on to team leadership, which is, unleashing the potential of others and empowering high performance. This is where coaching comes in, motivating others, setting delegating tasks, setting expectations, all of those really core skills. And then as you move up, it's the organizational leadership. So it's how do you go about managing sort of complex ecosystems, managing stakeholders, managing the culture of an organization, and leading that. It's that visionary piece. So usually, typical leadership programs are sort of tiered this way. You start with the self-leadership component first. Which leads me to, there's a really, I guess, a really good model that I use in my practice that I want to share with you today. It's called the Inner Development Goals. I'm not sure if you heard of this. So when I discovered the IDG framework, it made sense to me. So I'll just spend a couple of minutes on the history of the IDGs. The Inner Development Goals is a not-for-profit open source initiative, and I'm a part of, I guess, a community of global practitioners. In 2015, the UN set their sustainable development goals, the UN SDGs, which you might be familiar with. And that gave us a comprehensive plan for a sustainable world by 2030. There were 17 goals covering a wide range of issues that involve, people, needs, values, and so on. However, the UN SDGs has so far, the progress against them has been disappointing. And the research shows that, we lack the inner capacity to deal with our increasingly complex environment and challenges. And this is the world that we lead in. While the framework was developed for the planet and more from a sustainability perspective, it is very comprehensive and applicable to leadership. I began exploring how IDGs could be implemented within organisations. I have since left the corporate world, to pursue my passion of developing leaders. And one thing I've discovered is, I'm constantly unlearning and relearning. And that's something that I think we need to do when we're in leadership roles. When you move from one role, as a individual contributor to a manager or a supervisor role, you need to unlearn how you work and then relearn, what's a more effective way of leading. And that's the same every transition that we make through the leadership ladder, so to speak. And so through my leadership and coaching work, I know that true growth comes when we embark on a path of self-inquiry and exploration. So I want to share a little bit more about the inner developments and the inner development goals. And if you go to your handouts, I've got a handout there for you as well. And again, I just want to touch on this lightly, but the current IDG framework represents 5 dimensions and 23 skills or qualities, which are especially crucial for leaders to not only address, climate issues and planet issues, but fundamental in terms of how we lead. And I wanted to share that with you because it's a free resource. So I've put in links there in terms of where you can get more information. There's a whole guide in terms of diving into each skill, and there are some really practical activities that if you want to learn and more and cultivate more self-leadership. So the dimensions, I'll touch on the 5 dimensions. The first one is on being. So that's all about how we cultivate our inner life and develop and deepen our relationship to our thoughts, feelings, so that we can be more present and be intentional and non-reactive when we face complexity. So that's really about how do you cultivate that, whether you're having a difficult conversation with a team member, whether you're, having a challenging meeting. It's about practicing some of these skills. And then there's the thinking dimension. So that's really about developing our cognitive skills by taking different perspectives and evaluating, information and making sense of the world as a connected whole. So that's about the whole ecosystem piece. Often we tend to operate in silos, and we don't work in a vacuum. So it's about thinking about all the interconnected parts, and how do you then make decisions. The relating dimension is really about appreciating and caring and feeling connected to others, whether it's your colleagues, your teams, the wider organization, the wider community, and so on. And then collaborating. So again, there's some skills under that, looking at how we make progress on shared sort of goals, shared concerns, and our need to develop our abilities to include, and as leaders also hold space and communicate with stakeholders, that may have different values, different skills, and so on. And then the last one is about acting. So how do we, have the courage and optimism that we need for a true agency. And, how do we break old patterns and generate original ideas and act with persistence in uncertain times. So I've only just touched on it. I guess they go into a lot more detail as well. So feel free to, in the handout, there are some links. You can jump onto the IDG website if you're looking to, if you want to develop, sort of more self-leadership qualities. You can go in there. There's lots of exercises you can run for yourself, for your team. So there's lots of resources, and it's all free as well. And this is pretty much it, but this QR code, if you wanted to reach out, contact me, you can use this QR code as well. I think that's my 15 minutes. So I'm handing back over to you, Tegan.
Thanks, Sherry. It was really good to get some insights on what leadership looks like, I guess, through the different stages. And if anyone does have questions for Sherry, don't forget to pop them in the Q&A tab, and we will get to them very shortly. But Sherry, over the last few years, the dynamic of the workplace has certainly changed. It's been a rapidly evolving environment. So how do these changes impact the traditional leadership development models, and what adjustments are crucial for leaders to make in today's environment?
Yeah, great question. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the traditional leadership models, which were based in, around the Industrial Revolution. I think that's all, that's all evolving. It's been evolving for a while, focusing more on that self-awareness piece of leaders, whether it's looking at, our emotional intelligence and how we relate to others. And I think, COVID has accelerated some of that, definitely, working remotely, for example, you've got to change the way you lead. You know, you're not, you may not be in the same room as that person. So it's how do you go about getting to know that person? How do you go about how you build trust and interact? So during COVID, I took on a new role in my previous company, and I had to build a team, recruit some managers, and it was all done remotely because I couldn't travel to Indonesia at the time. So it was looking at, okay, so what skills do I need? How do I be intentional about creating a remote team? And making sure that I build trust, you know. So that's one thing. I think there's a lot of technology. So it's thinking about how do we lead? How do we leverage technology? I know in the Q&A that came through with the registration, someone mentioned AI. AI is a tool to help you as a leader, but it doesn't replace the role of leadership.
So I guess with that in mind, and I know you talk a lot about self-leadership and really developing that in order to lead others, what are some practices or strategies that we can use to enhance our own leadership skills, our self-leadership skills, to create effectiveness as a leader?
Yeah, I think, first of all, you know, obviously training, coaching, you know, the formal stuff really helps. But then it's about how do you then maintain some of those practices? And it's hard, you know. I've been in leadership roles, and it's hard to be self-aware when you're in the moment, when emotions take over, you know, and when you're dealing with personalities and complexities, and it's about being aware. So I think, you know, when I talk about self-leadership, it's that whole, how am I showing up? What is my present state? You know, and it's tapping into your emotional intelligence, self-regulation, and then also being curious about it. I think so. For example, I might, you know, react and say something I didn't mean to in a meeting, and it might be afterwards having some of that self-inquiry and going, okay, why did I react that way? What actually was a trigger, so that you can practice that. So, you know, I think in my coaching practice, what I suggest to leaders is practice mindfulness whenever you can. You don't have to be a Zen monk and do meditation, you know, a couple of hours a day. It's just, if you can practice a few minutes, because it allows you to be aware in that moment and how you respond to other people and the situation.
Yeah. So if someone is actively wanting to do a bit of self-reflection, kind of work on their self-leadership, what you said, taking that mindfulness approach and taking minutes in the day to set up what their mind will do and what their actions will be. What's another tool that they could use? Maybe that starts the day, or maybe a question they can ask themselves to build on, start looking internally for those leadership skills.
Yeah, there's a few that I would recommend. Not everyone's a fan of journaling, so journaling your thoughts, that's always helpful. And you can probably drill down and go, okay, what are specific questions, and maybe sort of write down 3 things, you know, at the end of in the evening. Evenings are always a good time to download. For me, I find personally, because that's when my mind's racing and thinking over across the day. So thinking about, okay, what went well today? What didn't go well today? Or even, you know, what were some of my reactions? And then just going through that process and reflecting on that. So reflection, asking yourself some of those, you know, questions to think about how you might be showing up.
And people are often put in a position of taking a leadership role without the proper support. So what would you recommend for organisations to ensure that those emerging leaders are equipped with the tools and resources to succeed?
So definitely support, you know, whether it's in a form of having a coach, you know, internally through the internal learning and development teams, if you have one, or some form of training, because I think it comes back to my point earlier around when people move roles, you know, not just the way they lead, but the way they work needs to change. So often what I've seen in my career is you might have someone in a very technical role, think engineer, scientist, etc. They then suddenly jump into a leadership role, but they don't have the necessary skills or the mindset change for that transition. So they're still doing the work. They might be micromanaging rather than leading the team, directing and taking a step back. So for I guess my advice to organisations is think about what is a transition that is needed for that individual to succeed in that role, and then think about, you know, whether it's formal training, coaching, mentoring, shadowing, and using all of those tools.
Yeah. And also, I guess, building on that, if a person is put in that position but wants to either take their own initiative or may not have the support of the organisation for that transition period, is there anything else, is anything you can kind of advise that they could do for themselves?
Yeah, look, there's lots of books, good podcasts, lots of online resources out there that you can look into. Inner development goals being one of them. That's just more about the self-leadership aspect. There's a lot of really good websites that you can get, free articles, free resources to help. I'm happy to share them afterwards. I just can't think of all of them at this present moment. Yeah.
Amazing. So, talking about your experiences, Cherry, what was a defining moment or experience that led you into the realm of leadership development, and how has it changed your perspectives?
Yes, I think it happened to me early in my career. I had a really great leader. It was even before I went into learning and development. I was a graduate. So I've always had really good leaders, and I was fortunate. And then I had the opportunity to start developing people, and I thought, this is what I want to do because I know the experience of having a good leader. But on the flip side, I've also experienced some really bad leaders, so I know the experience that people can have if they have a bad leader.
Yeah. I guess with that in mind, if we are, talking about a bad leader and having to, I guess, do that self-leadership again, whether you're in a team or whatever the situation is, how would you manage that, or what recommendations could you give for someone in that position?
Yeah, I think what I would have done, if I had any sort of, I guess, challenging relationships with my manager is have the courage to speak up and have a conversation, because I think it comes down to expectations and also different styles. What I'd found in this particular scenario was just we had different styles and we thought differently, and so therefore we just we clashed. I've had the same experience as a leader myself. Sometimes it may not always show up, but it's just having the conversation and building that trust and setting expectations. And I know there was a question around leadership styles as well in some of the questions. So I think that's really important, understanding your own style, understanding the style of your leader and how you can best work together.
Yeah, and I guess that goes in the opposite direction as well. It's understanding your style as a leader and the working styles of those who you are leading as well.
Yeah.
All right, amazing. I think we do have a couple of questions I've seen pop up in the chat. So Martine has asked, what is the role of AI in leadership?
Yeah, so I think AI is a huge advantage. It doesn't replace leadership. For me, it will help you practice. So here's a great example. I do a lot of workshops around giving feedback and coaching. And sometimes what you can do with ChatGPT is say, look, I'm having this scenario. Please help me prepare some questions to ask. That would be, that's how I would use it, whether and how you might structure the feedback, because I always, coach leaders to, especially if you're not comfortable with giving feedback, is to practice, write it down, practice it, and so on, and then say it in your own way. So that's just one example of how you can use AI, use it as a tool, think of it as your own leadership coach. But then I wouldn't replace it. So I wouldn't, send off that email. Yeah.
As with everything in AI, put your own stamp on it.
Yes. Yeah.
I think Karen has also said she's been really interested in starting to do some journaling. Are you able to give her any tips on resources, or even, I guess, your perspective on how to get started, what the best practices are?
Yeah, there's a great there's a great book or journal you can buy on Amazon. It's called the 5-Minute Journal, and it's fantastic because especially if you're new to journaling, it just gives you prompts and it literally takes 5 minutes. There's a morning section, afternoon section, so it just allows you to reflect on the day, and then it's really interesting when you go back and look at it. You can start to see patterns. So I recommend that one.
Great. All right, do we have any other questions from the audience today? We'll just give it a couple of minutes. But Cherry, while we're waiting to see if anyone else has any questions, maybe we can have a quick chat around, communication as a really important part of leadership, and the role it plays?
Yeah, so I think communication is always over communicate. And there's research done around this, there's been lots of surveys, whether it's you're communicating one-on-one or to a group, like to a team or the organization, always you're better off to over communicate than under communicate. Don't assume that just because you've communicated once that, the other party has understood. So I will be looking at, communicate more than you need to. And the other tip is if you're communicating to a group, think about what you might share. So stories are good because people can remember that, they can visualize it. So if you can incorporate storytelling into your communication, and of course, practice that.
Yeah, great. So we do have Martine asking if you can recommend any tools to coach or train other leaders.
Any tools? Well, there's lots out there. It depends on, I guess, where they're starting at, depending on, what the topic is, because it's so breadth in terms of leadership development. If you're looking at sort of that self-leadership piece, again, the inner development goals, and there's also another great resource by a company called the Conscious Leadership Group. They have some great videos and so on that really focuses on that emotional intelligence piece and that communication and the relational aspect of leading others.
Yeah, great. Now, I just had a look at the poll, and it seems like it's not, we're fairly even across the board, but winner coming up being where people feel their gap in the leadership development is really in leading others. So that coaching, delegating, motivating others, and performance management. Do you have any insights on where people could go to start developing that skills and experience?
Yeah, look, there are different, again, I think if you go to Conscious Leadership, they're a good one for free resources. Corn Ferry is another one. Some of the larger organizations, they have a lot of free resources for you. Culture Ramp is also another one that's really good. On our website, I've got a few up there, but obviously, the larger organizations have a lot more resources. And I think it shows to me that, organizations aren't investing in developing their leaders, especially during those transition and you're stepping into a new role. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Right. Well, I think that's. Oh no, wait. We might have one more question. Let's have a look. No, it's AI. So we've already had a chat around what the AI is in that space. You mentioned ChatGPT as a nice sounding board for ideas and formatting responses. So what I might do is I might wrap things up. But thank you so much for joining us today. I think there's been some really interesting takeaways on the concept of self-leadership and then how that gives the ripple on effect into other areas of leadership. So what I'd like to do now is just remind everyone to complete the survey, which should have popped up on your screens. We would really love to hear your thoughts and insights on today's chat, but as well as moving forward other topics that you'd like to hear about. We also do have a few things happening here at Rare Birds. We have International Women's Day coming up in March, and we are holding an event. So it is a breakfast event, and you can attend either in person in Sydney or online, and that's taking place on Tuesday, the 12th of March, and we'll be speaking about the Women's Financial Wellness Roadmap. You can register by scanning the QR code on screen, and I also will put a link in the chat for you to register that way. We are also welcoming new mentors into the Rare Birds community. So if you would like an opportunity to share your experiences with a mentee, we would love to chat with you. You can complete an EOI form by scanning the QR code, and will pop a link in the chat there as well. I'll just get those links for you now. All right. So thank you again, Cherry. It's been lovely chatting everything leadership and self-leadership today. And thank you everyone for joining us as well, and hope to see you next time.
Thanks everyone. Bye.